Hi, I'm Yazdi. Really looking forward to this session. I've done this twice over Zoom, but it's the first time that I'm called Cornell doing this myself in person, so I'm very happy to be here. I was wondering if any of you know what Kaiser Permanente is? Some of you? Yeah, tell me about it.
Kaiser Permanente is it's an insurance company as well, but it's a healthcare system in California, I think along the West Coast.
Yeah, so we have a slide on what Kaiser Permanente is. It's not really active in New York State, so I'm not surprised that many of you don't know it. It's a very big company. In fact, it is a non-profit healthcare company. If it was a for-profit company, because we are around $108 to $110 billion, we would be a Fortune 30 company. So it's really a big company. But it is, as was mentioned, is a health plan which also has primary care doctors, specialty care. It has hospitals, 40 plus hospitals, 616 medical office buildings, which is clinics, 24,000 physicians, 73,000 plus nurses. So if you're a member of Kaiser Permanente, you pay for your health, you don't pay for your sickness. Because once you pay, we take care of you, whatever happens to you. So it's like a closed system. We're there primarily on the West Coast. We're also in Colorado, and then out here we're in Virginia, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia. So we're not there in New York State. So I work for Kaiser Permanente, and what I do for Kaiser Permanente is I look after IT and shared services. So on the IT side, it's IT for the doctors, for the consumers, for our members, digital, IT for the insurance side, data and analytics, IT for the business functions like HR, finance, look after IT platforms and cybersecurity. In shared services, I look after supply chain, which is looking after the sourcing, warehousing, logistics, ordering, accounts payable, revenue cycle management, how we collect money from our members, construction. So at any given time, we have $8 to $9 billion of hospital construction going on, physical security, managing the facilities, medical, clinical technology, which is in our hospitals, you have MRI machines, you have IV machines, so we take care of those as the shared services. Employee services is HR shared services, travel and expense. I also look after the company's business optimization, redesign, AI, and automation. So that's my portfolio, IT and shared services. So if you look at this portfolio, and I'll talk about my career, I don't think I'm an expert in supply chain or construction or physical security. I'm an IT guy who also happens to run shared services. So we come back to this question of how do I feel confident running all of this if I'm not the domain expert in that? Before that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Bombay, in India. I'm an electrical engineer in an MBA, actually in marketing. Worked as a management consultant for 4 years, and then went into Procter & Gamble, which is a consumer goods company. Joined in India, and after a few years, they located me in Singapore. So I moved with my family to Singapore, then moved to the Philippines, then moved to the US, then moved back to the Philippines, had a brief stint in Japan, and then back to the US. Worked with them for 23 years, started in IT, and in Procter & Gamble, you had this model where IT and shared services were run by the same folks. Started running shared services, and then in 2018, I left P&G and joined Walmart, which is the world's biggest company, to run their shared services. And I thought that was the best shared services job in the world because you can't get bigger than Walmart. But then Kaiser Permanente invited me to run their shared services and IT. And I saw their scope. It was a lot bigger than what I was doing in Walmart, because in Walmart, I was doing IT, and then the shared services were accounting and HR. It wasn't as big as supply chain and construction and all of that. And of course, my wife didn't want to live in Bentonville, Arkansas, and moving to California was a good idea. So wife won, we moved. Okay. So this is about myself. And I want to, before I go to the next slide, I wanted to ask a question. I'm sure all of you want to do better in your career, right? Everyone wants professional growth. So if I ask a question, which is, what do you think is the most important criteria that people look for when they decide whether you're ready for professional growth or not? What's the most important thing? Yes?
Open-mindedness.
Open-mindedness, okay. What are the other thoughts? Come on. Yes?
Passion.
Passion, okay. These are very subjective, qualitative criteria, but go ahead.
I was gonna say like hardworking or taking initiative.
Sorry, taking initiative?
Yeah.
Initiative, okay. Yes?
I was gonna say adaptability.
Adaptability? Yes?
Thinking outside the box.
Thinking outside the box? What if you think outside the box but don't achieve anything? Okay. No, I'm not joking. I mean, these are good answers, so don't take me wrong, yeah?
Discipline.
Discipline? Okay. Here's Yazdi's answer. It's the ability to transform. Right? What's your name?
Sahil.
Saurav.
Sahil.
Sahil. Okay, Sahil. If Sahil gets a reputation in his company that anything I give to Sahil, he turns to gold. Any new assignment I give to Sahil, he will, in a couple of years, transform that area. He will make it so much better that we want to give him the next best thing. Okay? If your ability to transform, in my mind, is the most important criteria for professional growth. Okay, and of course, you want to transform not only for professional growth, you want to do good for your company. But professional growth is a nice perk to have. I would say that if you want to transform anything, it always answers 3 questions: what to change to, and how to cause the change. Right? So my first job in Procter & Gamble in IT was to look after the hardware, the mainframes, the PBXs for P&G in India. It's a system, and I have to figure out what to change to, and how to cause the change. My next job was to run the help desk, and I'm like, how can I make it a better help desk? What to change to, how to. Next was creating, running the finance systems. So at any given time, you're given a system, you should be trying to improve it. You don't want to just come to office and do your job and daily management, because if you do that, you're going to stay in that job. You've got to improve it. Anyone disagree with that? Okay? So the question is, if the ability to transform is key to your professional growth, and these are the 3 questions that you need to answer, do we have a framework for answering these questions? Are these just common sense, or do we create a framework that helps us answer these questions so that we are able to transform and do the right thing for the company? And this question fascinated me. What is the best framework to transform? Because as I said, when I first left my MBA and joined a management consulting firm, a consulting career is nothing but every 3 to 6 months, you get a new assignment, and you got to answer these questions: what to change to, how to cause the change. And then when I joined Procter & Gamble, it's a company which is a promote from within company. So you grow very fast, but for that you have to show that every 2-3 years you get a new assignment. You got to show how well you transform your area, and then you grow up. So you move into different countries, you move into different assignments, and you professionally grow. So this question was something that fascinated me. And I believe that if you are a systems thinker, you're able to answer these questions much better. Because in most people's mind, when you are trying to transform a system that is complex, And most companies have become very complex. A hospital system, each hospital is complex. Forget about a system where you have 40 hospitals trying to work together with a shared service and supply chain and an insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. It's a very complex system. Systems thinking is the answer. Unfortunately, most people think in a linear way. So when you have a very complex problem to solve, we treat it like algebra. You break it up into small parts, try to make each part work, thinking that when you put it together, you've got the answer. That's how most of our minds think because we are taught this way in academics. The belief is that an improvement anywhere in the system will improve the system as a whole. And this really turns out to be true. In fact, I think I've worked in many well-run companies, but I can give you example after example where really, really solid, good managers default to this way of thinking, which is linear. I mean, let me give you an example. When I joined Kaiser Permanente, end user IT is under me, so managing printers is under me. So we have, I don't know, 40,000 printers in Kaiser Permanente. So obviously, managing printers is a shared service. You don't want every floor to manage their own printers. So you have someone who's in charge of managing printers in the whole company. Now, if you ask that person, save me money, and that's all you tell that person, the person, if he does default thinking, he'll say, I have 5 to 6 printers on a floor, maybe I need 3, and maybe I'll save money. But that's linear thinking because what could happen is if you have only 3 printers on the floor and one is not working and a nurse or a doctor has to go to another floor to print, you're wasting a nurse and doctor's time, which on an aggregate is a lot more expensive than trying to save a few printers. Similarly, whenever there is a financial crisis, someone will say, let's cut the nursing staff. But then when you have more demand, with the remaining nurses, you'll have to pay triple for overtime, or you'll have to hire traveling nurses, which are very expensive. So once again, and in many companies, because have you guys heard of every quarter you have to show your report to the street, and your stock might fall if your margins are not good. With those pressures, even the best managers start thinking in a linear way. Okay, I would suggest that we all follow systems thinking, which is you're not trying to break up an entire system into small parts and making each part efficient and putting it back together. What you're trying to do is study the whole system and study the interactions between the system and figure out exactly what is it that you can change in your system that can drive the most results. And I want to talk a little bit about my history with systems thinking. So when I was a management consultant just after college, and this was in 1992, so 32 years ago, I was very lucky that that consulting firm actually, even at that time, was saying that consultants should learn systems thinking. But the methods that they had, I don't know whether they did not work or the models were not yet fully fleshed out. So we had some models which were like compare any system into like a human body. So if you're looking at an organization, figure out who's doing the work of the brain, who are the arms and legs, what's the nervous system. So there was something called living systems theory as a systems analysis model. Do we still have that out here? Do we still use that? No.
I don't.
there was another systems analysis tool called control theory where, I'm an electrical engineer, so we have circuit design and electrical control theory where if everything is balanced, K is equal to 1. So we used to actually map an organization to a electrical circuit and say, are you in a positive loop or a negative loop? It was all very esoteric and not very useful. So I loved the concept of systems thinking, I love the concept of what is the framework with which I can actually answer the 3 questions to transform. But the frameworks at that time that I learned, they didn't resonate. And obviously, when I went to PNG and I started getting assignment, I started asking the questions. But once again, it wasn't very something that resonated with me. And then in 2010, I was very lucky that I was asked by the leadership of Procter & Gamble to organize a study trip for the CEO and his lead team to go to India. Because around that time, there was this article that came out in Harvard Business Review called Frugal Innovation. And all of the examples were from India, where the Tata company had created a passenger car that cost $2,000. Okay, wow, how can they do that? It runs very well. It has all the gears. It's safe, but it costs $2,000 only. So how is that possible? There was a hospital in Bangalore in India that gave you better quality results than the best hospitals in the US, but at 1/20th the cost. How is it that they're doing it? So there were around 10 companies that we visited, and they were all talking about systems approach and systems thinking and design thinking. And they started talking about a framework called theory of constraints, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit. How many of you have read this book? You have to read it.
I think all of us, right?
Oh, you have. Or you got the book and not read it, but you have to read this. This is like the Bible of, in my mind, the best framework of systems thinking. It's a very simple concept. What Eli Goldratt, and Eli Goldratt was, is from Israel, one of the best thinkers, I think, in the world. And he basically said that in order to simplify a complex system, we got to figure out what is the bottleneck in the system, what's the constraint. And there's a way of finding it out, which I'll talk about. And just focus on that. Don't try to make improvements everywhere. Just focus on that one thing that will drive the most result. So in this book, The Goal, if you've read it, he's talking about a plant manager who's asked to run a plant, a manufacturing plant. A plant has many machines. And initially, they start by making every machine as efficient as possible. And then when they realized that when they were doing that, they were actually damaging the system because there was inventory piling up everywhere. And what they really needed to do is just find the one machine that was slowing down the line and focus on that and make it work and give it the support it needed, put more emphasis on it, elevate it. Everything fell into place. So this was basically systems thinking, because once again, what he was saying is, don't try to make every machine efficient. Try to find that one thing that will make the most difference. This is the same as thinking of a chain, like there is an input and an output, and the numbers above the letters are units per day. So would you try to improve everything, or would you only focus on C? You only focus on C, you make it at least more than 14. Till that time, that is the constraint. Once it is more than 14, then D is the constraint. So at one given time, only focus on what's the weakest link, and then go to the next one, and then go to the next one. And you will find that with the least amount of effort, you drive the most throughput. You get the most flow. And initially, people thought the goal was just about how to do manufacturing better. So I think Eli wrote the goal in 1994, and then in 1994, he wrote a book called It's Not Luck, where he explained the thinking as to here's the thinking, here's the way to logically think and use this thinking in any domain. And then he followed up in 1997 by writing Critical Change, which is a book on project management. So if you work on projects are a collection of tasks, right? The goal of the project is to create value as soon as possible. But if you are in charge of a task, that means you are in charge of a subsystem of a system that is the project, you will try to protect your task. You will put buffers on it because you don't want to be called out as the guy who's made the project late. So if you can do a task in 2 days, but you are multitasking or you have student syndrome, you will say, I'll do it in 6 days, because you don't want to be caught out if you don't do it in 2 days. So now every task in the project has 2 times the buffer than you really need, right? You need 2 days, but you said 6 days, there's 4 days of buffer. So Ellie explained how that is damaging the system, and how do you work on projects in a way that you drive the goal of this project, but you don't sort of leave out task leaders to hang to dry. It's a great book on project management. If anyone does projects, you got to read this. In this next book, Necessary But Not Sufficient, he used the same thinking process on how to work IT projects, or how to look at technology. Then in The Choice, he used the same thinking process on personal life choices. And in Isn't It Obvious, he used it on retail. Then there is the haystack syndrome, which he used for data and analytics. So he picked up domains, different domains, and he used the same set of principles, how to drive systems. He never called it systems thinking, okay? I think I'm the one who's sort of connecting systems thinking to theory of constraints, but it is systems thinking. And I found it very, very easy to solve management problems using this very simple framework. Any questions so far? Okay. So how do we do this? A simple way would be that you first start, if you got a system to look after, you first start by defining what is the goal of the system. So you get people who are stakeholders, either in the project or in the portfolio or in the system, into a room. And the first step is to align what's the goal of the system. And you might think this is easy. You'd be surprised as to how unaligned this is in many companies. My favorite example of this is when I brought Goldratt's thinking into Procter & Gamble. Initially, what we started doing is trying to do IT projects faster. So I was in charge of global finance systems. We used Goldratt's methods to do IT projects faster. And very soon we realized that within 3 to 6 months, we were doing projects at least 30 to 40% faster and driving. And when you do a project fast, you get 3 advantages. One is because you're doing it faster, you're doing it cheaper. Because you don't carry the overhead of the project for a longer time, so you're doing it cheaper. Because you're doing it cheaper, you can use that money to do more projects and drive more value. That's the second value. And the third value is because you're doing it faster, the value of the project you deliver earlier to the company. So there are 3 advantages to doing projects faster. After we started doing projects faster, we started looking at, can I use these techniques to analyze the portfolio, to figure out which projects should we do first so that we drive the most value. And after that, we started looking at all of our services. So when we were looking at a service called the Treasury Service, so imagine in Cincinnati, where the Procter & Gamble global headquarters are, in the terrace, there are these 30 people. All of them are 20 to 30 years in the company, and their job is to manage globally the cash that Procter & Gamble has. It's the Treasury Department of Procter & Gamble. It's a very coveted role, and these guys like form a clique of 20 people who work together for 20 to 30 years. You have to sort of work your way up to get into this group, right? The best of the best finance people become treasurers. And we got them into a room and asked them, what's the goal of the Treasury Department? And we got 5 or 6 different answers. Can you imagine? These folks have worked together for 20 years, and you ask them, what's the goal of your department? And it took us 1.5 days to figure out what's the goal of Treasury. Because initially people said something like, to get the most interest from the cash that we have. And in the end, we actually decided on how can we drive the most value out of the working cash that we have, because you can get value through interest, you can get value by planting it into fixed deposits and getting dividends, you can even use your cash to pay suppliers early and get early payment discounts. So there's so many things that you can do with your cash. So that then once you've decided that's the goal of the system, the way you do systems thinking is you map out what is it that's happening in the current reality that's not desirable, what's happening that is not, it's an undesirable effect of the current reality. And then you do a cause and effect diagram to find out maybe one or maybe two root causes. Then you figure that how to break open those issues, how to solve for them, and figure out if you solve for them, are you causing other unintended effects? And then you go back to step 3. Usually a thinking process takes 2 to 3 days, but everyone comes out pretty much aligned. It's a great exercise to do. And it's fascinating. And obviously this facilitation, even if I wouldn't want to do it myself for something that is one of my services, because if I start facilitating, I won't get the right pushback to my own ideas. So we usually get third-party consultants who are theory of constraints facilitation experts who will come and do this thinking problem solving for us. So this is what we use in KP. It's what I started using in P&G and started using in Walmart. One of the best things that happened when I used this in Procter & Gamble is, even though we were using it in IT and shared services, we were involving the business. And one of the business partners, he really liked this, and he said, yeah, it's great if you do a IT project faster, you save a couple of $1 million, that's all good. But if I use this same method and I think of, in Procter & Gamble, you create a new product in R&D and it goes to the shelf, like you create a new variant of Tide Pod in R&D, and then it goes to the shelf, it takes 2.5 years. Can I use this to shave off 30% of that time? So he started using this methodology, not on IT projects, but on business projects. He was saving billions of dollars. That guy is now probably going to be the next CEO of Procter & Gamble, and he owes me one. Okay, so this was very successful. We use it in Walmart, and now we're using it in KP. Hospital operations, you can imagine, is an extremely complex, right? If a patient gets into emergency department, how do they go from there to the hospital? How much time would they stay? How to go from there back to their home? If you can make it really effective, really the throughput is high. We have a measure in hospitals called patient day rates. From 1,000 members, how many days per patient do we have per 1,000 members? And it's roughly around between 200 to 500. So if you have 1,000 members, you have between 200 to 500 patient day rates. That means that many hospital days are used. And if you take 50 days, if you go 50 days down, for us, that's like $10 million. So there's a lot of savings out there for us to do. And you're not sort of pushing the patients out, you're actually taking care of them in a way that they're getting well faster. So I know I sort of linked this to my first slide where I showed all of the services that I look after. I'm not a supply chain expert. I'm not a construction expert. I'm not a physical security expert. Never seen a gun in my life. So how do I manage these services? It's as simple as hiring the domain experts who understand the domain and then coaching them on systems thinking and doing it with them so that together we know exactly what is to be done and how each service can improve their quality, their cycle time, their cost per unit, and their value year by year. So that's really the formula for my work. Any questions? And then I move to a case study. Let's see how much time do I have. Lots of time. Okay, so this is a real thing that happened. This was in 2012, just as I was trying to get Goldratt's thinking into Procter & Gamble. So I don't name P&G out here, but this is P&G. Okay, so I was looking after global accounts payable. What is global accounts payable? You have 5.5 million invoices that come to P&G to get paid. They're either coming from chemical suppliers, or they're coming from IT suppliers, or they're coming from office supply suppliers. 5.5 million invoices we pay a year. At that time, Procter & Gamble was a $65 billion company. So 40 billion was our spend for those invoices. I'm sure the remaining is labor, employees, etc. We had 3 service centers servicing 94 countries. I was the leader of accounts payable as a service. We already had 99% payment on time. So usually when you go to even the best shared service companies, payment on time is between 96 and 97%. So we already had the best payment on time. We always paid on time. If we didn't pay on time, it was because it was the supplier's fault. They didn't give us the right documentation or something. Otherwise, we always paid on time. And the total cost of operations for accounts payable globally was around 200 million. So that was my job. I was managing accounts payable. And my boss said, can you save me 20 million? Can you save me 10% of 200 million? Which is huge, right? I mean, you have people who are doing work. I mean, you have to, how do you remove? So, what would you automate? I mean, the first thing that people would think of is take everyone who is in United Kingdom, and Newcastle was our shared service center. Can you take it from Newcastle and put everything in Asia, put all accounts payable to Asia? So most people would have done that. Or can you automate? Most people would have thought that way. Thank you. But we decided to do a systems thinking. So this is not a case study, it's a story. Okay. So we decided to do a systems thinking workshop. And at the end of the systems thinking workshop, I went to my boss very cockily, and I said, forget $20 million. I think I can save the company $400 million. So how's that possible? Your cost of operations is $200 million. How can you save the company $400 million? Then I explained to him how we came to that number. So even though we pay on time, our payment terms are something like 60 days, right? Once we get an invoice, so everyone has a payment term, and usually it is 35 days or 60 days or 75 days. At that time, our payment term was 60 days. But because we're a cash-rich company, we allowed our suppliers to say who needed the cash, say if they wanted in 10 days or in 15 days or in 20 days, they could take the money early, but they needed to pay us a discounted rate. So it's usually 2%. So for example, so if you have to pay 100,000 to someone after 60 days, the supplier would say, I'm okay if you pay me now, but just pay me $98,000. Okay. The problem is that we could allow our suppliers to come in and take their money only after 12 days, because our average days to make an invoice ready to pay was 12 days. So we could make an invoice ready to pay in 12 days, but we were holding it for 60 days before we paid it, or we paid and got a discount. But if we could take that 12 days and make it 2 days, okay, if we could do that in the shared service, we calculated, and if only 20% of our suppliers came and took their money after 2 days, and they gave us a discount, if you added that up, it came to actually $500 million, and we were saying 400, because you always want to give a result that you can do better than, right? You want to exceed your targets. So now the question is, how do you go from making an invoice ready to pay in 12 days to 2 days. As we did our systems thinking, we realized there were 1 or 2 or 3 constraints. The first one was just a policy constraint, because if an invoice comes in and the invoice, the cost on the invoice and the quantity on the invoice matches what's on the purchase order and the goods receipt, the system actually does the 3-way match and the invoice is ready to pay automatically. That's what we call no manual touch. The reason why we could not do this for all is because sometimes the price was different, or sometimes the quantity was different. When the price was different between the invoice and the purchase order, there was a policy that said, the shared service, you can't do anything with it. You have to go to the buying organization. You got to send them emails. You got to find the buyer who created the PO, and you got to explain to him what has happened, and he or she is the only one who can say, yes, the price on the invoice is correct. Even though we had established that 99% of the time, the price on the invoice was correct, the price on the purchase order was outdated. So we just changed the policy and said, as long as the shared service can go to the contract and see if the price is right, you don't need to go to the buyer. Because when you went to the buyers are more interested in having steak dinners with their suppliers. They have much more important things to do than see emails from the shared service and go do their own research and say yes or no. So they would take 15 days. So if you take out the buyer, just change that policy. Just that change in policy, which took just 1 month to change, no automation, nothing. We went from 12 days to 6 days. Second thing that we did was, we used to have a contract with a third party, Hewlett-Packard, who used to take our paper invoices and scan them. And the contract was 10 years old. And even though they had automated optical character recognition, they had used robotic process automation, we had not updated the contract. So HP would still take 4 or 5 days to do the scanning. We gave them an extra $200,000-$300,000 and said, no, now you scan it on the day you get your invoice. And that once again brought our it down to 3 days. We never reached 2 days, but we did save $400 million. And when you save $400 million, it wasn't a saving in the cost of operations. It was actually hitting the margin of the company. But because you made the process cycle time go down, work comes out. You could also say the effort of people following up with the buyers went away. You could save even the cost of operations. We never calculated how much, but even your cost of operations go down. So it's very important when you are looking at a small operations like accounts payable in Procter & Gamble. These are very small operations if you look at compared to the whole of Procter & Gamble. But the ability to link the goal of accounts payable to the goal of the company, which is to make more money now and in the future, you have to take everything that you do, and connect it to the goal of your company, okay? Which is, in a way, systems thinking. You're thinking of the larger system. I will give you another book recommendation. It's a book by Ram Charan. Have you heard of Ram Charan? Okay. At one point in time, I don't know whether he's now, he was, so this was 2010, his average daily rate was $85,000. Okay, so he's like the most expensive consultant in the world. It's my inspiration. Okay, Ram Charan has written a book, What the CEO Wants You to Know. It's 120 pages of the same thing, which is whatever you are doing, connect it to the goal of your company. Okay, so that's my case, and I'm open to questions. Anyone, you want to start off, Rana?
Thank you so much, first of all. Thank you so much for very interesting, inspiring. What was very interesting is that the saving came out not from the area of the target for saving as well. So it's an interesting question where you actually questioned the question there.
Yeah. I don't know whether I can use this board. Can I?
Yeah.
If it works, yeah. I usually when I run a service, I tell my service leaders this is known as Yazdi's favorite shape, the triangle. Quality, timeliness or speed, let's call it speed. It's really cycle time, cost per unit, and value. Okay, so these are like the 4 important things that you want to want your service to drive. Value means the value that your service drives outside of your service to the company. And what happens is in a shared service or in any service, people focus a lot on cost. I want you to cut costs down. The problem with focusing on cost is when you focus on cost, you could have a detrimental effect on quality or on speed. You could have that. But if you focus on quality, that means you reduce defects. If you reduce defects, your rework comes down, your cost will come down. If you focus on cycle time reduction, you're making your process frictionless. Once again, costs come out. So actually, cost is important, but you don't drive cost out by focusing on cost. You drive cost out by focusing on quality and speed. And then you should focus on what value does your service drive, because that's in multiples of your cost, usually. So for example, I talked about medical device management, right? Medical device management, I can say I'm going to do it at cheaper cost, or I can say I will run it in a way that a medical device is always available. So if something's not working, I'll swap it out with something that's working. I'll have a warehouse somewhere that I will ship something immediately. And so instead of having a mean time to repair, if an MRI machine goes down, having a mean time of repair of 30 days, I have 2 days. That's driving so much more value than trying to save costs. And this is nothing but simplifying systems thinking for a shared service. But you can use this triangle for anything.
From personal decisions to company operation.
You could, yeah.
Thank you so much, Yazdi. Questions?
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
And you can please introduce yourself first and then ask your question.
My name is Ben, healthcare policy major. I was wondering, you had that slide that was talking, it went in stepwise fashion, and then there was kind of the one like major roadblock, and it was the idea that like the weakest point in the chain is what's going to hold back the whole system. Like what are normally, I guess specifically in the case of Kaiser, what are normally the steps that you follow in order to actually identify what that major like piece of the system that's lagging everything behind is?
It's a facilitation process where the facilitator actually maps out what are the undesirable effects and how are they interrelated. And usually at the end of 2 to 3 hours, we find it. I don't know, sometimes I think the facilitator knows it. He's just making us go through the exercise so that we find it, because that guy does this only for a living. And he's probably seen the same problem being addressed in many different companies, but he doesn't tell us that. And sometimes because I find that I've been in this way of thinking for 10 years, I would not be able to facilitate. It's a completely different skill. But sometimes I feel I can sense the answer and have to sort of stop myself, because we should go through the process. Most people, when they think of an answer, they're thinking of solving the symptom, not the root cause. Most of the times they say, the problem is we don't have technology. The problem, the solution cannot be the lack of something. Okay, you have to find out, hey, the problem is this, and maybe technology is the answer. So, I believe that you've got to go through the facilitation process.
So, thank you so much. And if there are questions in the chat or in the room, we are ready for any other questions. Just have to figure out how to.
Hi, my name's Radia. I'm a biology and society major, and I just wanted to kind of expand on your conversation where you were like, you don't know, you're not an expert in like construction or an expert in all of these shared services that you kind of manage. So how do you kind of incorporate people who are in those professions or like in healthcare workers, right? Like the nurses who are actually on site. How do you get their input and also teach them like systems thinking?
Yeah, I mean, most of the times the nurses are my end users, so we have to understand their needs. But it's really the service leaders and the business partners who get into the facilitation process. So the way I do it is I make them read the goal before you come into the workshop. Everyone read the goal. And if you've read the goal, it's a very easy read. You can read it in 3 hours because it's basically a story. And then usually we start the facilitation process by going through at least 2-3 hours of the fundamentals of systems thinking using theory of constraints. And then we start getting into the problem, and we start with what is the uncompromised goal we want to achieve. And once that is aligned, we start getting into drawing up the current reality tree that takes us into what are the barriers. So that's the process we follow.
Hi, thank you so much. Sorry for coming in to speak with us today. I'm actually a hotel administration student, so a lot of the systems thinking that we deal with is in terms of like the service process model and how we can really optimize that. So I'm wondering how you see like the differences and how we can apply everything that you spoke about today to more of like a service instead of a product.
This is all services. I'm managing services. All of these are services. Facilities operations. I run the folks who clean up the ORs, the janitors. They're part of a service called EVS that come up to me. They're all a service. So I use this more on service actually than on products. It's only on the IT side that I use it on products. But this is very relevant. Now, if you got a framework that works for you, use that. I'm not framework biased. I just want people to use the same framework in an organization, because then you start talking the same language. Okay, so if you're working for Marriott and they're using design thinking or consumer journeys or whatever, it's all. I love frameworks. I think common sense is very uncommon, and we've got to help people with frameworks.
Thank you.
I used to trouble my son a lot with systems thinking because he was a squash player. And when you're coaching someone to play squash, if he has a great forehand but a lousy backhand, would you keep on practicing his forehand? Because very soon his opponents would find that his backhand is really lousy. So once again, you're finding like, what is the weakest link in his armor? And you try to focus on that and make sure that it is not the weakest link anymore. And then you go to the next one. So even in sports coaching, you find different coaches have different philosophies. But even, I forgot the name, Tom Brady's coach was talking about how he figures out what to focus on in every person. And I was like, ooh, he's using theory of constraints, because he's focusing on what's the weakest point at this time? How do I improve that instead of just doing practice everywhere? Al has a question.
Yes, so I will pass to Al. Al, would you like to ask the question yourself? You can unmute. And Al is one of the founders, or maybe their department chair founder for the systems engineering, and he's joining us via Zoom with, I think, over 50 years of service at Cornell.
Wow.
Al, the floor is yours.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I thought that was an absolutely outstanding presentation. By the way, we were using the goal as a textbook for many years in our manufacturing program, and I sort of went through a lot of other things they're doing, and got into systems engineering. Anyhow, one question I have that is I don't know the answer to, and I don't even know a really good approach to, is in many organizations, when they try to save money, they hive off the work on some other people who may not even be as good at it, or maybe paid 5 times as much as the person who used to do it, in order to, quote, save money in that department. And I was wondering if you've seen that before, and how you combat that for people who don't think systems. How do you go and convince somebody who wants to do that with and who may be somebody over your level and may or may not feel like listening to you. I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I see this all the time. And I report to the CEO, so I have a good seat at the table to see if I can stop it. But many times it still happens. And it's like the most, it's the one thing that frustrates me the most, because you can actually see the impact immediately. You're trying to save headcount, but you're now having that work off to consultants who are A, going to cost more, and B, going to do the work and go away, and the next consultant is going to learn. Or you send the work, outsource the work to India, and you don't do it in the right way. I see it all the time. And sometimes, so I never say, let's use systems thinking, because I think that won't work, because no one wants to be told you are a linear thinker. I just get data on the table. So there was a time when we were cutting nurses, and I just put on the table the data, because when you're running shared service, you're privy to a lot of data. So I just put on the table the data that how much we are spending in overtime and traveling nurses, and that number was so huge that actually we changed our strategy from not hiring nurses or letting nurses go to now let's hire 2,000 nurses in the next 3 months. So data is the answer if you have access to data. I don't think people who work with me on my level, I've ever used the word systems thinking. I do sometimes say, let's step back and see the whole picture, but even that sometimes I find is cocky. I just put data on the table and put consequences on the table. So that's the way I make it work, Al. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, that was very helpful. It does require someone who has the time to gather the data, and in some big organizations, it's hard to find that person. But you obviously have that role in Kaiser, and are doing a fantastic job with it. Obviously, thank you very much.
Thank you, Al.
Yazdi, I have a follow-up question. When you shared those steps for the systems, I think the first one was define the goal, the second was understand the current reality. My question is, how would you ensure that the value proposition you put forward is accurate given all the perspectives of the different stakeholders? Therefore, if you're cutting something, for example, that is perceived as waste, is not necessarily something essential in a different layer. So how do you ensure in all those layers the right value proposition is defined?
We just link to the goal. We try our best to link to the goal to the margin of the company. So even though Kaiser Permanente is a non-profit, because most healthcare providers are, for many reasons which I don't want to get into, in the end, we have to make a margin. We try to make a modest 2% margin. So if we're a $100 billion company, we try to make a $2 billion margin. And we put $5 billion in community benefits. So in a way, we are making $7 billion margin. $5 billion we give free care, and $2 billion is our margin. So margin is important. Without margin, there is no mission. So any service, if we are or any project or any portfolio, we try to drive the goal towards what is the most impact on margin. Everything else is secondary, and that makes it easy for us to cut through the nonsense and go straight to what's the impact of the margin. Now, the only time we may have a issue is when it is user experience versus margin. Member experience. So, but member experience is also in a way connected to margin. Exactly. It's not immediate, but it's in the medium to long term. So we do that, and I have not found at the end of the exercise. I've actually can't remember a single time at the end of the exercise that we don't think we have found the right goal.
can I have a follow-up question? So when you say that connecting everything with the margin you have the short term, long term, medium term, and long term. So it's very easy to talk about the short term, like you said, the units per cost per unit, but sometimes that is harmful in the long term. So how do you
Yeah, so it's a difficult question to answer in 5 minutes. There's a concept in theory of constraints called throughput versus cost. And throughput is the rate at which you improve your margin. So we're really focusing on the factors that will improve the rate at which you improve the margin now and in the future. And that's how we avoid getting into the short and long term issue of now, usually in lean, throughput is very synonymous to flow or creating capacity. In TOC, throughput has a different definition. It's the rate at which you improve the margin of a company now and in the future.
Thank you. Because this dynamic has better before worse or
Yeah.
worse before better.
You're right.
pattern.
Yeah.
Very classic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I actually had a similar question, so thanks for bringing it up. But I want to, before I do, because we only have a few minutes left, so I just want to see if there is any final comments or questions by folks in the room or folks in the chat. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, I think it's given the time, we will wrap the conversation. Sorry? We will wrap the conversation. Yazdi, thank you so much for the past few years of teaching, and this year coming in person, meeting with us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for excellent lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you.